One quiet moment on a live show changed everything. Keanu Reeves said something that stopped Jimmy Fallon cold. What was said wasn't in the script, and it left the audience speechless. Tonight, a secret from Keanu's past comes alive on stage, and no one could have expected what happened next. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The NBC studio was alive with the familiar energy of a live broadcast, buzzing with excitement that flowed from every corner. The iconic red "Live" sign cast a steady glow above the stage, a beacon signaling that the cameras were rolling and the night's entertainment was about to begin. The house band launched into their opening number with vibrant enthusiasm. Trumpets blared bright notes, drums kept a steady, energizing beat, and the rhythm section created a pulse that reverberated through the packed auditorium. Audience members clapped, cheered, and whistled, their excitement building as they awaited the night's guests. Jimmy Fallon appeared on stage with his signature high energy. His entrance was marked by wide arms and a broad grin that spread across his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Let's go, people," he called out, his voice full of warmth and electricity. "Tonight is special." The crowd responded with a roar of applause, their faces lit with anticipation and delight. This was the kind of night where the outside world slipped away, and laughter, music, and shared moments took center stage. Backstage, the atmosphere was a whirl of carefully coordinated activity. Producers moved briskly between monitors, communicating in hushed tones over headsets. Camera operators adjusted lenses and angles, ensuring every shot was perfectly framed. Stylists added final touches of makeup and made subtle tweaks to wardrobe. The pace was fast but purposeful, a delicate dance to maintain the illusion of spontaneity that live television requires. Every detail mattered. From the timing of cues to the smallest movement of a guest's hand, the night's success depended on precision. The energy backstage was charged, a blend of nervous excitement and professional focus. The crew knew millions of viewers would be watching, expecting entertainment, humor, and those unexpected moments that make television unforgettable. As Keanu Reeves moved from the backstage shadows into the full glare of the studio lights, the usual surge of electric excitement took on a different character. Where other guests arrived with fanfare, bright smiles, and animated energy, Keanu's entrance was marked by a quiet strength and calm confidence that drew attention without demanding it. His steps were measured, almost contemplative, as if he was walking not just into a television studio, but into a space charged with deeper meaning. His black suit was sharp yet understated. The jacket hugged his frame without stiffness, and the sleeves bore gentle creases, a sign of comfort and ease rather than rigid perfection. The open collar of his crisp white shirt hinted at a relaxed formality, as though inviting others to set aside pretense and speak honestly. Hanging prominently from a thin silver chain rested a crucifix, simple yet striking against the dark fabric. The pendant caught the light with subtle glimmers, reflecting a quiet symbol of faith and personal history. Keanu's face was a study in calm complexity. His smile was faint, soft, edged with a touch of wistfulness. It was the kind of smile that suggested someone who had journeyed through trials and emerged carrying both scars and peace. His eyes, deep and steady, held a reflective quality, as if they had seen far beyond the immediate moment, touching places of both sorrow and hope. There was an almost magnetic stillness to his presence, drawing the studio's attention as he took his place on the stage. The audience, sensing this shift, settled into a hushed anticipation. Jimmy Fallon, the energetic master of ceremonies, greeted Keanu with genuine warmth. Their brief hug was more than polite formality. It was a gesture loaded with respect and shared history. The two men eased into their seats beneath the bright studio lights. The lively music of the house band softened and faded, while the audience's applause tapered to a focused silence. signaling the start of a conversation that promised to be anything but routine. With millions watching live, Jimmy Fallon launched the interview in his trademark, upbeat style. "Keanu, it's such a pleasure to have you back," he said, flashing a broad smile that filled the studio with warmth. "You look better than ever. Is it Botox or just good lighting?" The audience responded with hearty laughter, the kind that relaxes nerves and builds a connection. Keanu returned a soft smile, but there was a pause before he spoke. His hands rested lightly on his knee, fingers occasionally tracing the edges of the silver crucifix. "Maybe just time," he said quietly, voice low and contemplative. The moment hung lightly, inviting the audience into a space that felt more intimate than usual. Jimmy chuckled, easing into playful banter. "And this suit? It kind of looks like John Wick in recovery. All you're missing is the dog." The crowd laughed again, but beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension began to ripple. Keanu crossed one leg over the other, his movements deliberate. "Sometimes we put down the weapons," he said softly, "but the weight stays." The room fell quieter, his words carrying an unspoken depth beyond their simple phrasing. The pause that followed was pregnant with meaning, a silence that spoke as loudly as any sentence. Jimmy gave a light laugh, though uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. "Wow, we're getting philosophical tonight. And no dog." His smile remained warm but was edged with a slight unease as Keanu's calm gaze met his own. "Absence isn't always loss," Keanu added, voice steady and anchored. "Sometimes it's an invitation." The entire studio seemed to exhale, the emotional weight settling like a soft blanket over everyone present. Cameras captured the subtle exchange, the flicker of emotion in their eyes, the stillness in their posture. The audience sat rapt, sensing that the evening's tone had changed irrevocably. What had begun as a typical late-night show was evolving into something sacred and profound. The usual rhythm of jokes and laughter gave way to a shared moment of reflection, a quiet space where silence carried its own message. For a brief time, the bright studio transformed into a sanctuary of presence and honesty. Keanu Reeves settled into the chair across from Jimmy Fallon with a calm that felt both familiar and different. The energy he carried was softer, more thoughtful than usual, and there was a quiet gravity in his eyes that drew the audience's attention even before he spoke. The silver crucifix hanging from his neck caught the studio lights with a gentle gleam, a subtle but potent reminder of something deeper, beneath the surface. Jimmy, as ever, tried to keep the mood light, breaking the silence with a grin and a playful jab. "So, Keanu," he said, leaning forward, "this suit. Looks like John Wick taking it easy, huh? Maybe a little John Wick recovery going on?" The crowd laughed, the familiar banter easing the tension. But even as Keanu smiled, there was a shadow of something more. Keanu's voice was soft but steady as he replied, "Yeah, sometimes we put down the weapons." He paused, the weight of his words settling in the room. "But the weight stays." The audience quieted almost instinctively, sensing the shift. Jimmy's smile wavered slightly, and the laughter faded into a thoughtful hush. The crucifix swung slightly as Keanu shifted in his seat. His fingers brushed it gently, as if grounding himself in the symbol he carried. The studio lights shimmered across the silver, highlighting its worn edges, telling a story without words. It was clear that this was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a tether to something personal, something profound. Jimmy swallowed, his eyes flicking briefly toward the control room, as if searching for a cue to lighten the mood. But there was no signal, no band ready to break the tension. The moment had paused the usual rhythm, inviting reflection instead of laughter. The audience leaned in, captivated by the unexpected depth in Keanu's tone. The stillness in the studio was thick with unspoken emotion. Keanu's gaze held a kind of ancient calm, the kind that comes from having carried burdens quietly and with grace. He looked directly at Jimmy and said, "Absence isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's an invitation." The words floated softly through the air, profound in their simplicity. Jimmy blinked, momentarily unsure how to respond. The usual quick wit that defined his interviews felt inadequate here. Instead, he gave a small, tentative smile and nodded slowly, acknowledging that the evening was veering into territory where silence spoke louder than words. Keanu continued, his voice steady but imbued with a weight that demanded attention. "We often think putting down our weapons means we're free of the fight, but sometimes the fight stays with us in ways unseen." His fingers lingered on the crucifix, tracing the outline of the cross as if drawing strength from it. "It's the weight of memories, of love lost, of battles that never truly end." The crowd sat mesmerized. This was not the casual celebrity interview they had expected. It was a moment of raw honesty, a glimpse into a soul shaped by experiences far beyond the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. The crucifix, shining softly against his chest, became a symbol of resilience and quiet faith. Jimmy cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "That's pretty deep, Keanu. I think we're all feeling that tonight." His attempt at humor was gentle, more a bridge back to familiarity than a joke. The audience chuckled softly, but the gravity lingered. Keanu smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth breaking through the solemnity. "Sometimes," he said, "the heaviest burdens teach us how to carry ourselves with grace." He looked out at the crowd, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and hope. "It's not about forgetting. It's about living with the weight and still choosing peace." The cameras captured every subtle expression, the slight tightening around Jimmy's eyes, the quiet nods in the audience, the shimmer of the crucifix catching the light one more time. The atmosphere was intimate, almost sacred, a shared human moment broadcast live to millions. Jimmy leaned forward again, trying to recapture his usual warmth. "You know, Keanu, you've always been known for your calm in the storm, but tonight, I'm sensing something different. Are you okay?" His voice was softer now, carrying genuine concern beneath the lighthearted tone. Keanu met his gaze steadily. "Maybe tonight," he said softly, "is the night when silence needs to speak." The studio seemed to hold its breath, the weight of that statement settling deep into the hearts of everyone watching. It wasn't just a poetic phrase, it felt like a call to presence, to listen beyond the noise. The band stayed silent. The audience quieted further, as if drawn into a collective pause. Jimmy blinked, the tension visible in his shifting posture. He glanced toward the control room once more, but found no rescue. This was a moment to be lived, not escaped. Keanu's fingers continued to brush the crucifix lightly. "We live in a world that often fears stillness," he said. "We fill the silence with noise, laughter, distractions. But sometimes the deepest truths are found in the quiet." His words were gentle but powerful, a reminder that healing and understanding often come through patience and listening. Jimmy's smile returned, tentative but genuine. "Wow, Keanu, that's poetic, and honestly kind of unexpected for a late-night show." His voice carried both admiration and vulnerability. The audience responded with quiet applause, moved by the sincerity in the room. Keanu nodded once, acknowledging the moment's weight without needing to explain further. The crucifix gleamed in the light once more, a silent testament to the unseen stories each person carries. The night had taken a turn. What began as playful banter had evolved into a profound exploration of faith, loss, and resilience. The studio was no longer just a stage for entertainment. It had become a space for honest connection. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted. The usual rhythm of jokes and laughter slowed to a near halt as Jimmy Fallon leaned in, his expression softening with concern. He watched Keanu Reeves carefully, sensing something beneath the surface, a subtle change in the energy that was both compelling and delicate. The playful, light-hearted tone that had started the interview now gave way to a quiet intensity. "Keanu," Jimmy said gently, his voice lowering just enough to carry sincerity, "are you okay?" It was more than a casual question. It was an invitation to reveal what lay beneath the calm exterior. The audience hushed, waiting, as the cameras captured every nuance of the moment. Keanu's eyes drifted downward, resting briefly on the silver crucifix that hung from his neck. The pendant caught the studio lights, shining softly against the dark fabric of his suit. The camera zoomed in slowly, lingering on the delicate symbol, as if acknowledging its weight and significance. It was a pause filled with meaning, a silent acknowledgement of the personal story behind the simple piece of jewelry. After a moment, Keanu's voice broke the silence. Quiet, but clear. "Maybe tonight is when silence needs to speak." His words echoed through the studio, a gentle ripple spreading through the crowd and crew alike. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Jimmy blinked, trying to recover the usual flow of the show, but the night had taken a different course. "Wow," he said softly. "That's poetic." His voice was lighter, an attempt to bridge the charged stillness with familiarity. Yet even as he spoke, the weight of the moment lingered, casting a quiet shadow over the room. The audience remained captivated. There was no laughter, no applause, only the shared experience of a moment that had transcended the typical late-night banter. It was as if everyone in the studio had been invited into a space where honesty and vulnerability held sway, where silence carried the power to speak louder than words. Jimmy shifted in his seat, the cue cards in his hands trembling slightly as he tried to regain his composure. The usual jovial host was still there, but the night had peeled back a layer, revealing something more raw and genuine beneath. He glanced at Keanu, whose calm gaze held a quiet strength that seemed to challenge the very nature of the conversation. The crucifix caught the light again, shimmering softly like a beacon. Keanu's fingers brushed it gently, a habitual gesture that seemed to ground him in the moment. His eyes, steady and reflective, met Jimmy's with a depth that spoke of unspoken stories and the endurance of quiet faith. Jimmy cleared his throat and gave a small, almost nervous smile. "You know, Keanu, that crucifix, does it mean something special to you?" The question was casual on the surface, but it carried the weight of curiosity and respect. The audience leaned in, sensing the significance behind the simple inquiry. Keanu held the pendant delicately between his fingers, turning it slowly as if tracing the memories it carried. After a brief pause, he spoke softly. "It does." His answer was simple, yet profound in its understatement. Something personal. He looked out toward the audience, his voice steady. "Everything that's true is personal." Then, almost as if to preserve the mystery, he added, "But not everything personal has to be spoken." A hush fell over the studio once more. The silence was not awkward, but heavy with presence, the kind that leans into your bones and lingers in your chest. Jimmy nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of Keanu's words. The air was thick with the quiet acknowledgement that some truths are felt deeply rather than explained. Jimmy tried to shift the tone back. "You really seem different tonight. Are you sure everything's okay?" His smile was tentative, a subtle mixture of concern and support. The audience held their breath, awaiting the response from a man who had always been known for his composure. Keanu folded his hands on the table between them, the crucifix swinging lightly with the motion. "Tonight," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "silence needs to speak." The words echoed in the room like a soft prayer. The cameras captured every detail. The worn edges of the crucifix, the steady gaze, the stillness that had transformed the space into something sacred. The band remained silent, the usual musical interlude absent, as the audience absorbed the depth of the moment. The laughter and applause that had once filled the room had been replaced by a reverent quiet. The studio had shifted from a place of entertainment to a space for reflection and connection. Jimmy looked down for a moment, collecting his thoughts. He then glanced back up, his expression softened by the vulnerability he was witnessing. "Keanu," he said quietly, "sometimes it feels like the world is too loud, like there's no room for silence or truth." Keanu nodded slightly, acknowledging the shared feeling. "Yes," he replied, "we fill the noise to avoid facing what's inside. But sometimes the quiet reveals more than words ever could." His tone was gentle but filled with conviction, a reminder that healing often comes not through speaking but through listening. The audience was still, many leaning forward, caught in the intimate conversation unfolding before them. The cameras moved slowly, lingering on faces softened by empathy and understanding. Keanu's crucifix shimmered one last time, a silent emblem of the journey he had traveled, the weight of loss, the power of faith, and the strength found in silence. Jimmy gave a small, genuine smile, a moment of connection between host and guest that transcended the scripted lines. "Tonight," he said, "we're all reminded that sometimes silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning." The studio remained hushed as the conversation continued, each word carefully chosen, each pause carrying its own weight. The night had become more than an interview. It was a shared moment of presence, a space where vulnerability was met with respect, and silence was given a voice. Years before that night in the NBC studio, Keanu Reeves found himself in the gray, wind-swept streets of Chicago. The sky hung low and heavy, a dull blanket of clouds casting muted shadows over the city. It was a cold day, the kind that made the air feel sharp and the streets quieter than usual. Keanu had come to the city for a small independent film project, a departure from the blockbuster roles that usually defined his career. He wanted something different, something quieter, more honest. The studio they were using was tucked away in an old warehouse, its brick walls weathered and scarred by time. Inside, the echoes of footsteps bounced off concrete floors and high ceilings. Pipes rattled in the background, and the scent of stale coffee lingered in the air. The set was sparse, the crew small. It was a place where the magic of film was crafted not with grand spectacle, but with patience and subtlety. Keanu spent long hours there, waiting between takes, reading scripts, and watching the light shift through dusty windows. It was in this in-between time that he met Elijah. Elijah was the janitor, a quiet man with a gentle presence. He moved through the studio like a shadow, unseen by most but deeply aware of everything happening around him. His uniform was simple and neat, though worn from years of service. A short beard framed his face, giving him an air of thoughtful calm. Their first encounter was unremarkable to anyone else, but for Keanu, it was the beginning of something profound. He noticed Elijah one afternoon as the man pushed a mop across the floor near the soundstage. The janitor didn't look up much, but when he did, his eyes seemed to see more than the surface. Keanu, feeling a quiet restlessness, approached. "You're not really waiting on lighting," Elijah said without turning, his voice low but clear. "You're listening to something inside." Keanu smiled, intrigued by the insight. "You always this poetic with the actors?" he joked lightly. Elijah chuckled softly. "Only the ones who look like they've been walking for a long time." With that, he moved on, leaving Keanu to ponder the words. In the weeks that followed that first meeting, Keanu found himself drawn to Elijah more often than he expected. It wasn't just the conversations that called to him, it was the quiet presence Elijah carried, the way he seemed to understand things that words alone could never capture. During long breaks on set, while others chatted about schedules or scripts, Keanu would seek out Elijah, often finding him quietly tending to his duties, his demeanor calm, almost meditative. Their conversations were like soft ripples in still water, gentle but powerful. Elijah didn't speak in grand ideas or elaborate philosophies. Instead, he spoke of faith as something subtle and patient, not as loud declarations or demands, but as listening. The truest kind of faith doesn't shout, Elijah once told him. It listens. It listens to the world, to the silence, to the parts of ourselves we often ignore. Keanu found these words sinking deep. They seemed to resonate with parts of himself he hadn't fully understood. The pressures of fame, the noise of public life, and the constant push to perform had often drowned out quiet reflection. Elijah's wisdom reminded him that faith wasn't about having all the answers or making noise to be heard. It was about presence, about being truly still and open, even in the chaos. On quiet afternoons, they would share coffee in the dim corners of the studio, the sounds of cameras and footsteps fading into a background hum. Elijah's reflections often took the shape of short phrases or poems he had written over the years. They weren't preachy or dogmatic, more like invitations to consider things differently. "Elijah," Keanu asked one day, "why do you write these things? Who do you write them for?" Elijah smiled softly, a look of someone who had carried many unspoken burdens. "I write them for the silence," he said simply. "For the moments when words fail us, and we need to listen to what's not being said." Keanu began to see Elijah not just as a janitor, but as a keeper of quiet truths, a guardian of things that didn't require grand stage or spotlight. Their friendship, though unassuming, became a refuge, a place to be real without performance or expectation. Then, one afternoon, Elijah showed Keanu a small notebook. The leather was worn and softened by time, its edges frayed from years of handling. The notebook was tied closed with a thin leather cord, simple but carefully cared for. Inside, the pages were filled with handwritten reflections, prayers, and sketches, some just a sentence long, others spanning several lines. None claimed to have all the answers, none demanded belief. Instead, they offered moments of stillness, wisdom in quiet form. Keanu flipped through the pages slowly, absorbing the words as if they were a secret map to understanding things he'd been feeling but couldn't yet name. "What is this?" he asked softly. Elijah shrugged, as if the notebook was no more than a keepsake. "Just notes to no one," he said. "Or maybe to someone who hasn't found them yet." Keanu felt a quiet gratitude and an unspoken sense of responsibility. Elijah wasn't asking for anything, but Keanu understood that the notebook was a gift, an offering of faith in its most humble form. It was not about loud declarations, but quiet endurance, a steady walk through life's unseen battles. As the independent film wrapped up, the studio began to quiet down. Crew members packed up equipment, lights dimmed in empty corridors, and the bustle gave way to silence. One morning, Elijah came early as usual, but left without a word, disappearing into the gray Chicago morning as quietly as he had arrived. Back in his trailer, Keanu found the leather notebook waiting for him on the desk. Inside the front cover, a small handwritten note was tucked between the pages. The ink was faded, the script delicate but clear. "When you meet someone who carries the same emptiness, give them this." Keanu read the line again and again, the words echoing in his mind. At the time, he didn't fully understand the meaning, but he sensed it was a message that would reveal itself in due time. The notebook became a companion, carried with him through years of work, reflection, and change. It was more than just a collection of pages. It was a quiet invitation to listen, to the world, to others, and to the silence within himself. The words and prayers in the notebook offered comfort during moments of grief and solitude. They became a reminder that faith was not always about grand acts or spoken words, but often about presence, patience, and the courage to face what lies beneath. The memory of Elijah lingered in Keanu's heart. The janitor's quiet wisdom had opened a new door for him, a door to a deeper understanding of belief, one that embraced mystery and silence rather than certainty and noise. Now, sitting on the stage under the bright lights of Jimmy Fallon's studio, that memory weighed softly but powerfully on Keanu. The crucifix hanging at his chest caught the light once again, its gleam a silent testament to a journey that spanned time, pain, and hope. The worn leather notebook and the lessons it carried were part of that journey. A symbol of faith as listening, of truth as a quiet presence, and of the invisible burdens that so many carry, with dignity and grace. As the interview settled into an unexpected rhythm, Keanu Reeves reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket. His hand emerged holding a leather-bound notebook, worn and softened by years of handling. The cover was textured and creased, its edges frayed gently, like a silent testament to countless moments spent in quiet reflection. With deliberate care, he placed the notebook between himself and Jimmy Fallon, letting it rest on the smooth surface of the table. The room seemed to draw a collective breath. That simple action carried a weight beyond the physical object. It was a bridge to something deeper, something unseen yet profoundly felt. The worn leather caught the studio lights, glinting softly, as if inviting everyone watching into a sacred space. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that commands attention without demanding it. Jimmy's eyes locked onto the notebook, the ease of his usual humor momentarily replaced by genuine curiosity. His fingers hovered over the cover, hesitant, as if touching it might break the delicate energy surrounding the moment. The presence of the notebook shifted the entire tone of the show. This was no longer a routine conversation. It was a moment pregnant with unspoken stories and unseen journeys. Keanu's voice broke the silence softly but firmly. "This notebook," he said, "was given to me by someone who understood silence and faith in a way I hadn't yet." His gaze met Jimmy's steadily. A man named Elijah. He didn't preach or judge. He simply listened and held space for things that words often can't capture. The audience was silent, many leaning in as if trying to catch every nuance. Keanu's words resonated beyond the studio, touching something universal. The search for meaning beyond noise, the longing to be seen without pretense. Jimmy's gaze lingered on the notebook, his fingers gently brushing the worn leather as if feeling the stories embedded in its pages. His voice softened. Elijah was a janitor? Seems like an unlikely source for such deep wisdom. What was it about him that made such a lasting impression? Keanu's eyes grew reflective, his hand resting lightly on the notebook as if drawing strength from the tangible connection. Elijah was not just a janitor, Keanu replied quietly. He was a man who carried an extraordinary stillness, the kind of presence that doesn't speak loudly but fills the room with quiet understanding. His wisdom came from living with silence, not avoiding it, but embracing it. He paused, and the studio's ambient sounds seemed to fade into the background as the gravity of his words settled over the audience. His reflections, written in this notebook, were never meant for wide eyes or grand stages. They were personal prayers, thoughts, and meditations, offered to those who carry burdens unseen, who listen more than they speak. The camera moved closer to the notebook, capturing the delicate lines and smudges on the pages. The ink was faded in places, the handwriting flowing with a rhythm that suggested both urgency and peace. The silver crucifix hanging on Keanu's chest caught the light again, connecting the spiritual journey he described to the physical symbol he wore daily. Faith, Keanu continued, isn't always loud. It's not a call to arms or a demand for belief. Sometimes it's just about being present in the silence, about holding space for the things we don't understand yet. Jimmy nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning. It's like the notebook is a map for navigating the quiet places inside us. The grief, the hope, the questions without answers. Keanu smiled faintly. Yes, and it reminds me that sometimes the most profound faith is the one that endures in silence, that listens patiently, even when there is no response. The crowd was hushed, many moved beyond words. The studio had shifted from a setting for light-hearted entertainment to a space for shared human experience. The notebook lay between them like a relic of healing and hope, its presence a testament to the unseen struggles carried quietly by many. Jimmy slowly closed the notebook, his demeanor softened, touched by the moment. "It's rare to see something so deeply personal shared on a platform like this," he said quietly. "Thank you for trusting us with it. And with you." Keanu's eyes softened in return, a quiet gratitude shining through. "Sometimes," he said, "sharing silence is the loudest statement we can make." This notebook is more than words on paper. It's a companion on a journey through loss, doubt, and the slow, steady process of healing. The audience sat in stillness, many visibly moved by the vulnerability and depth of the conversation. The cameras pulled back slowly, framing the two men sitting across from each other, connected not only by the interview, but by the shared human truths now unfolding. Jimmy looked toward the audience, then back to Keanu. "You've always been a man who speaks with few words but great meaning. Tonight, you've given us something invaluable, a reminder that faith isn't always a loud declaration, but often a quiet courage to simply be still." Keanu nodded gently. The silver crucifix caught the light once again, gleaming softly like a beacon of resilience and hope. The interview had transformed from scripted dialogue into a moment of profound connection and presence. The leather-bound notebook remained on the table between them, a silent symbol of the invisible burdens many carry and the quiet strength required to bear them. It was no longer just a prop. It was a bridge connecting hearts across the silence, inviting everyone to listen, to understand, and to hold space for their own journeys. The room held its breath as Keanu Reeves carefully opened the worn leather notebook. The pages inside whispered softly as they were turned, the texture delicate, carrying the faint scent of aged paper and time. His fingers moved slowly, intentionally, as if each word was a step into a sacred space. The audience watched in silence, the usual hum of the studio fading away into a stillness that felt almost sacred. Keanu's voice broke the quiet, reading aloud from the first passage. "The soul never screams. It knocks, and if you're too busy laughing, you won't hear it." His tone was soft, steady, as if sharing a truth held close for many years. The words hung in the air, deep and resonant, inviting everyone to lean in and listen beyond the surface. The camera zoomed in on Keanu's face, capturing the subtle shift in his expression. His eyes reflected a mixture of pain and hope, as if the passage was a key to unlocking something long hidden. The silver crucifix around his neck caught the light, shimmering gently, as though affirming the quiet strength behind the words. Jimmy Fallon's usual easygoing smile began to fade. His eyes, once sparkling with the expectation of a playful interview, now revealed a flicker of vulnerability. The forced laughter that had punctuated earlier moments was gone, replaced by a growing sense of solemnity that spread through the studio like a wave. Keanu turned another page, his voice dropping even softer. "Faith is not volume. Speech is not truth." The sentences were simple but carried immense weight. The silence in the room deepened, the audience fully absorbed in the gravity of the moment. It was as if the very essence of the interview had shifted from entertainment to something far more profound. As Keanu continued reading from the notebook, his voice softened even further, almost like a whisper meant for the soul rather than the ears. The passages spoke of fear that lurks beneath laughter, of silence that carries the weight of truths too heavy to speak aloud. "The world is full of people laughing because they're terrified of their own echo," he read, pausing briefly to let the words sink deep into the stillness of the room. The studio's atmosphere shifted palpably. The cheerful noise that usually accompanied late-night shows faded away, replaced by a reverent silence. Jimmy Fallon's composure, once light and buoyant, now showed cracks. His eyes briefly flicked toward the control room, searching for a sign or a cue to break the growing tension, but no instruction came. It was as though everyone backstage recognized that something sacred was unfolding and allowed it to breathe. The crucifix hanging around Keanu's neck caught the light again, glimmering with a quiet, steadfast glow. It was a visual anchor to the words he read aloud, words that revealed the hidden fears and unspoken burdens carried quietly by many. "Sometimes we laugh to keep from listening," he said, meeting Jimmy's gaze. There was no accusation or demand, just an invitation to face the silence that most try to avoid. Jimmy swallowed, his throat tightening as he struggled to maintain the veneer of his usual easygoing persona. The audience was captivated, some with hands pressed to their chests, others dabbing away tears or simply sitting still, absorbing the weight of the moment. It was no longer a comedy segment, but an intimate conversation about the rawness of human experience. Keanu's reading touched on the paradox of faith and fear, the courage it takes to sit with the unknown. The notebook's passages spoke of endurance, hope, and the delicate balance between breaking and healing. Every word seemed carefully chosen, a message whispered across time from Elijah to Keanu, and now to everyone watching. Jimmy finally found his voice, quieter and more vulnerable than before. "That one hits kind of hard," he admitted, his smile fading into something more sincere. "You spend your life making people laugh, and sometimes it feels like laughter is the only shield." Keanu nodded in understanding. Laughter can be a shield, yes, but the real strength is in facing the silence, the fears and griefs we carry beneath. His words floated in the air, resonating with everyone present. Keanu gently closed the notebook, placing his hand softly over the worn leather cover, as if protecting the precious thoughts held within. His voice grew softer still. "The man who gave me this notebook didn't believe in religion as many do, but he believed deeply in stillness. He believed in listening, not just to others, but to the parts of ourselves we often ignore." The audience seemed to lean in, drawn closer by the authenticity in Keanu's words. The crucifix shimmered faintly under the stage lights, a symbol of enduring faith and quiet strength. Jimmy's eyes searched Keanu's face, sensing the profound personal history tied to this moment. "You're speaking of Elijah," Jimmy said, his voice low, filled with newfound respect and wonder. Keanu nodded, his fingers still resting lightly on the notebook. "Elijah was a messenger of silence. He taught me that faith isn't about having all the answers, but about having the courage to sit with the questions and the unknown." The weight of the exchange settled between them, thick and meaningful. Jimmy's usual charm gave way to a rare vulnerability. "I've done countless interviews, met so many people, but no one has made me feel like this before," he confessed, voice wavering slightly. "Maybe it's because no one ever asked me to stop performing, to drop the mask and be raw." Keanu's smile was gentle, almost tender. "Maybe tonight, you don't have to," he replied softly. His gaze held Jimmy's, steady and kind, offering a silent promise of understanding. The leather notebook sat quietly between them, no longer just a prop but a symbol, a testament to the invisible journeys of grief, hope, and faith that many carry alone. The room remained still, as if everyone was holding their breath, aware that this moment was something rare and sacred. Jimmy's fingers brushed the notebook's cover lightly, a gesture full of meaning. "Thank you for sharing this with us, Keanu, for being real in a place where so much is often just performance." Keanu nodded once. "Sometimes, being real is the most courageous act of all." The crucifix glinted one last time, a quiet emblem of resilience and grace. The interview had shifted, forever touched by the courage to speak silence aloud. For a moment, the bright lights of the studio felt softer, as if they too had dimmed to honor the weight of what was unfolding. Jimmy Fallon, who had spent countless nights hosting with a grin and a quick joke, let his guard slip in a way that few had ever seen on television. His voice grew quieter, the usual lively cadence slowing into something raw and unpolished. "You know," Jimmy began, his eyes searching Keanu's for a silent permission, "sometimes humor is the only way I know how to survive." The words hung in the air, vulnerable and sincere. The audience, who had been holding their breath, now leaned in even closer. They were no longer watching a performance. They were witnessing a man peel back layers he usually kept hidden. Jimmy swallowed hard and looked down briefly, gathering his thoughts. "After my mom passed away," he confessed, "I found myself laughing more than crying, not because I was okay, but because laughter was a shield. It was easier to make people smile than to let myself feel the pain." His fingers curled slightly on the armrest of his chair, betraying the tension beneath his words. Keanu sat still, steady as a rock, his calm presence a silent support in the room's charged atmosphere. The silver crucifix around his neck shimmered faintly in the light, a quiet symbol of faith and endurance. The leather notebook lay between them, a repository of reflection and hope. Jimmy's voice wavered as he continued. "Faith became something distant for me after she died. I wasn't sure it was something I could hold on to anymore. I felt lost, disconnected, like I was walking through a fog with no clear path." He paused, the weight of the moment pressing in, and then looked up with eyes that glistened with unspoken grief. The audience sat in respectful silence, many nodding as if understanding from their own experiences. The studio had transformed from a space of entertainment into a sanctuary of shared human vulnerability. Jimmy's bravado, the hallmark of his career, had melted away to reveal a man struggling with loss and searching for meaning. Jimmy's gaze remained fixed on Keanu, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. The walls of humor he had built over years seemed to crumble in this quiet space between them. His fingers traced patterns on the table, restless yet restrained, betraying the turmoil beneath the calm exterior. "I've spent so much of my life making people laugh," Jimmy said softly, his voice trembling just slightly. "It's like a shield I put up, to keep the pain away, to keep the silence from swallowing me whole." His hands clenched briefly before relaxing, a small sigh escaping his lips. The audience, sensing the gravity of this confession, grew even quieter. The usual energy that filled the room was replaced by an intimate hush, as if the studio itself was holding its breath. Faces in the crowd mirrored the empathy in the room, some with tears welling, others nodding as if recalling their own hidden battles. Keanu listened with unwavering calm, his presence a steady anchor amid the storm of emotion. The crucifix resting over his heart caught the light again, its quiet shimmer a reminder of the faith that had buoyed him through his darkest hours. The leather notebook between them seemed almost sacred now, a vessel carrying not just words but lifetimes of silent struggle and hope. Jimmy continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "When my mom passed away, I was shattered. I felt like a part of me disappeared with her. Faith, for a long time, felt like a distant stranger, a story I no longer recognized." He looked down, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "I didn't know how to be without her, and I wasn't sure if I believed anymore." The weight of his confession settled heavily in the room. It was not just a story of loss, but of a profound disconnect, a drifting away from the spiritual anchor that once held him steady. The laughter and lightness of the show had vanished, replaced by a shared moment of raw human truth. Keanu's voice broke the silence, gentle but resolute. "Faith isn't always about certainty or answers. Sometimes it's about the courage to sit with the questions. to hold space for the unknown without fear. His eyes met Jimmy's with deep understanding, reflecting a journey they both had walked, albeit on different paths. The audience sat motionless, caught in the gravity of the moment. Keanu's words were a balm for the pain that so many carried silently, a reminder that it was okay to not be okay, to feel lost and still keep moving forward. Jimmy exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, but the vulnerability remained. "It's hard to admit sometimes," he confessed, "but maybe I was afraid that without the jokes, the smiles, I wouldn't know who I am." He paused, searching for the right words. "Or maybe I was afraid that if I stopped pretending, the silence would swallow me." Keanu's expression softened further, a quiet compassion shining through. "Pretending can be a survival tool," he said, "but healing begins when we let down the mask and allow ourselves to be truly seen." His hand rested lightly on the leather notebook, a symbol of that journey from silence to presence. The crucifix caught the light once again, gleaming like a silent witness to the resilience found in faith and vulnerability. The studio was enveloped in a stillness so profound that even the smallest sound, breathing, a quiet sniffle, felt magnified. Jimmy's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he looked at the notebook, then back at Keanu. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for reminding me and everyone watching that it's okay to be vulnerable, to carry the weight, and to keep going." The audience, too, seemed to hold a collective breath, absorbing the depth of the exchange. The room was no longer a stage for scripted laughter, but a shared space for healing and honesty. The connection between the two men transcended the interview format, touching the hearts of all present. Jimmy's voice softened further. "Maybe tonight is the night I stop hiding behind the laughter. Maybe it's time to listen, to really listen to the silence I've been avoiding." His smile returned, but it was gentler, more genuine than before. "Maybe that's where the real strength lies." Keanu nodded in agreement, the faintest smile curving his lips. "Sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is to be still, to listen, to carry our stories, even when they're hard to tell." The crucifix shimmered one last time, a beacon of quiet faith in a noisy world. The interview, intended as light entertainment, had evolved into a profound conversation about grief, faith, and the courage to face life's shadows. The notebook rested between them, a testament to the power of silence and presence. The audience sat spellbound, aware they had witnessed something rare and transformative. Beyond the glitz and the cameras, a moment of shared humanity had unfolded, leaving an echo that would linger long after the lights dimmed. The worn leather notebook had been closed gently moments before, but now Keanu reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small bundle of folded letters, their edges yellowed with age and care. Each letter was carefully creased, as though holding within it stories too delicate to be rushed or shared casually. Keanu placed the letters on the table with reverence, as if laying down pieces of a hidden history. "Go!" Jimmy's eyes widened slightly, the weight of the moment deepening. "Those are letters?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with awe and curiosity. "Written by Elijah?" Keanu nodded. "Yes." Letters he wrote but never sent. His fingers lingered on the edges, tracing the folds with a tenderness that spoke volumes. He believed some truths are too heavy to deliver in the moment, meant only for the time when the silence asks to be broken. The camera zoomed in on the aged letters, the paper fragile and stained by time. The audience leaned forward, collectively, sensing they were about to witness something profoundly intimate and raw. Keanu unfolded the top letter slowly, his voice steady but low. "I saw you once standing in front of a crowd. They laughed so easily. You smiled, but your eyes didn't." The words seemed to pierce the air, soft yet piercing. You made them forget the weight, but I could see yours." The audience grew silent. The room felt charged with an emotional energy that went beyond words or performance. The letter was more than ink on paper. It was a mirror reflecting hidden pain. Keanu continued reading, each sentence a brushstroke painting a picture of quiet grief hidden behind laughter and silence. "I saw the boy who sat outside the hospital room, too afraid to go in. I saw the son who made jokes in the hallway so the nurses wouldn't see him cry." Jimmy's composure began to waver. His usual confident smile softened, replaced by a shadow of vulnerability rarely seen on the bright studio stage. He blinked rapidly, his breath catching ever so slightly as the words hit a place long guarded. Keanu's voice remained calm and measured. "You lost someone, didn't you? And you carried that silence like a shadow, ever since." His eyes locked onto Jimmy's, offering no judgment, only a deep recognition of shared humanity. "They told you it wasn't your fault, but your heart didn't believe them." The room was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of paper as Keanu held the letter steady between his fingers. The audience seemed to hold their collective breath, fully engaged in the rawness unfolding before them. Jimmy's throat tightened. His jaw clenched slightly as the weight of the letter's message pressed down upon him. He looked down at his hands, then back up, the struggle to maintain control evident in his eyes. "You blamed yourself, didn't you? Not for the illness, but for the silence. For not telling her what you were too scared to say." The tears began slowly, glistening in the studio lights before tracing silent paths down his cheeks. Jimmy did not try to hide them. The barrier between host and guest, between performance and truth, had broken. The audience was moved, many wiping their eyes, feeling the depth of the moment. Keanu's voice softened further. "You thought being funny would protect you. You thought applause would fill the hollow space inside. But every time they laugh, you wonder if she would have laughed too. And that is the weight you've never spoken out loud." The atmosphere thickened with shared understanding. The letters, once hidden away, now carried the voices of those silenced by grief and fear. The exchange between Keanu and Jimmy transcended the stage, reaching into the hearts of all watching. Keanu carefully placed the letter down on the table, treating it with the reverence of a sacred relic. The worn paper seemed to breathe quietly, carrying the weight of stories untold and emotions long held in silence. Jimmy's breath hitched as he absorbed the gravity of the moment, his chest rising and falling unevenly. The tears on his cheeks glistened under the studio lights, reflections of a pain once hidden, now exposed. The room held a sacred stillness, one where time seemed to slow, and every heartbeat echoed like a drum in a cathedral. Jimmy's usual composure had melted away completely, replaced by raw vulnerability. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and brushed the edges of the letter again, as if searching for comfort in the fragile paper. "I didn't expect to feel this," Jimmy admitted, voice breaking with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I've built my career on making people laugh, on lightening the mood. But tonight it feels like the laughter was just a mask, hiding all this." He gestured vaguely to the quiet audience, the stillness in the room, the unseen burdens each person might carry. Keanu nodded gently, his eyes reflecting a deep empathy that seemed to embrace the shared human experience between them. Sometimes humor is a shield, but beneath it, there's a place where silence lives, a place that needs to be heard, even if it can't speak. The silver crucifix caught the light once more, shimmering quietly like a beacon in the dim studio glow. It symbolized resilience and faith, not loud declarations but steady presence. The leather notebook and letters, once private, had now become vessels of connection, bridging the gap between pain and healing. Jimmy leaned back slowly, exhaling a long breath, as though releasing a weight he'd carried far too long alone. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick with gratitude and newfound understanding. "Thank you for bringing this honesty, for showing that it's okay to not always be okay." Keanu returned a faint smile, warm and reassuring. "Healing begins when silence is given space, when we allow ourselves to feel without judgment." He paused, letting the moment linger, then added softly, "It's in the quiet that we find the strength to keep walking." The audience remained hushed, many wiping tears or holding hands, moved by the rare intimacy of the exchange. The interview, once designed for light-hearted entertainment, had become a powerful testament to the courage of vulnerability. Jimmy looked once more at the notebook and letters. "These pages," he said, voice reverent, "aren't just words. They're a lifeline for anyone who's ever felt alone in their grief." Keanu nodded in agreement. "And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is simply to listen, to ourselves and to each other." The crucifix gleamed quietly, the letters lay gently on the table, and the studio was filled with a shared sense of presence, healing and hope, an unspoken promise that, even in silence, we are never truly alone. The studio air hung heavy with unspoken emotions. Jimmy Fallon's eyes darted around, searching for the right words but finding silence instead. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath along with him. The laughter and applause that usually punctuated the show had evaporated, replaced by a profound stillness. This was no longer entertainment. It was something deeper, something raw and real. Jimmy cleared his throat softly, the sound fragile but determined. "My mom," he began quietly, voice almost breaking. "She was sick for a long time." The words felt like a confession, like opening a door to a room many had never entered. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the table where the leather notebook and aged letters still lay. "During those years, I coped the only way I knew how, with jokes and laughter." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I thought if I could make the room smile, if I could make them laugh, maybe I could keep the darkness at bay." The audience listened, rapt and silent. Many faces reflected tears or sympathetic nods. Jimmy's voice grew steadier as he continued. "But the truth is, behind the laughter, I was terrified. Terrified of what was happening, terrified of losing her. I'd joke around the house, make funny faces, try to be the light in a very dark place." He paused, the memory weighing on him. But sometimes, when the laughter stopped, the silence screamed. Keanu's gaze remained steady, filled with quiet understanding. He reached out and lightly touched the notebook. "Silence is powerful," Keanu said softly. "It can be a place of peace or a place of pain. And sometimes, that silence needs a voice. It needs someone willing to speak the truths we're afraid to say." Jimmy looked up, eyes glistening. "I was afraid to speak that silence," he admitted. "I was afraid that if I stopped laughing, if I stopped pretending, the grief would consume me." Jimmy's eyes searched Keanu's face, as if looking for an anchor in the storm of emotions flooding the studio. His fingers nervously traced the edge of the table, a subtle gesture betraying the internal struggle that words alone couldn't capture. The burden he carried, the weight behind the laughter, was laid bare in the quiet space between them. "I thought I could outrun it," Jimmy confessed, his voice cracking slightly under the strain. "The grief, the fear. I thought if I kept joking, if I kept the audience laughing, maybe I could fool myself. Maybe I could pretend that nothing was wrong." He paused, swallowing hard, the vulnerability evident in his eyes. But grief doesn't care about jokes. It waits in the silence, in the spaces between the laughter. The room held a reverent silence, each listener sensing the depth of a pain often hidden beneath the surface of public personas. The audience, once expectant for humor and light-hearted banter, now sat with tears glistening in their eyes, feeling the shared humanity in Jimmy's quiet confession. Keanu nodded slowly, his calm presence a steadying force. "Faith isn't about never falling down," he said gently. It's about the courage to keep walking even when you can barely see the path. It's about finding strength in the silence, in the waiting, in the unknown. The crucifix at his chest shimmered softly, an unspoken symbol of resilience and quiet hope. The leather-bound notebook lay open between them, a repository of silent prayers and reflections, linking the stories of pain and perseverance. Jimmy exhaled, his breath trembling slightly. Sometimes I think I was more afraid of facing the silence than the pain itself. He looked up, eyes shining with tears. It's easier to make people laugh than to face what's real inside. Keanu's voice was steady, filled with empathy. Many of us hide behind noise, laughter, busyness, distractions, because the silence demands we confront parts of ourselves we fear. But healing begins when we listen, when we allow the silence to speak. The tension in the room began to shift, the heaviness softening into a fragile hope. The audience remained rapt, hanging on every word, moved by the courage it took to reveal such intimate truths on a stage meant for laughter and light. Jimmy's hands folded in his lap as he collected himself, the tears still lingering but his voice gaining strength. Thank you for listening, and for showing me that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. His eyes met Keanu's with a newfound respect and gratitude. I've spent so long trying to be the person who keeps the room light, but maybe it's time to stop pretending. Keanu smiled softly, a quiet affirmation. It's in those moments of truth that we find real connection, when we stop performing and start being. That's where faith lives, not in certainty, but in presence. The crucifix gleamed faintly, a beacon of steady light amidst the shadows of grief and doubt. The notebook lay like a bridge between them, a symbol of the journeys they had each traveled, paths marked by silence, sorrow, and the slow, steady work of healing. Jimmy exhaled deeply, a subtle shift in his posture signaling relief and release. Maybe that's what we all need, he said quietly. Someone to sit with us in the silence, to witness the parts we hide. Keanu's gaze was warm, full of understanding. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to be that someone for another person, to listen without judgment, to hold space for pain and hope alike. The audience, many with tears on their cheeks, sat in reverent silence. The interview had transcended its usual form, becoming a shared moment of healing, a reminder of the power of vulnerability and presence. The light softened slightly, embracing the room in a gentle glow. The crucifix caught the light once more, a silent promise of faith's enduring strength. The leather-bound notebook remained open, a testament to the quiet courage it takes to face life's deepest challenges. The show was no longer just about laughter or applause. It had become a sanctuary for truth, for grief, and for hope. A place where silence was no longer empty, but filled with meaning. The leather-bound notebook had been closed gently a moment ago, but now Keanu reached deep into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. His hand emerged slowly, holding a small, aged envelope, sealed tightly with a delicate crease that spoke of years passed in quiet waiting. The paper was yellowed, fragile at the edges, worn by time, yet preserved as if it carried something sacred. Keanu placed the envelope gently on the table, its presence commanding a silent reverence. Jimmy's eyes widened as he leaned forward, his curiosity piqued but tempered by an unspoken respect. "What's that?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. The audience too leaned in, sensing that this envelope might hold more than just words. It might hold a key to understanding the profound exchange unfolding between the two men. Keanu's gaze softened. "This was given to me by Elijah," he said quietly. "On the night before he left, he told me it wasn't meant for me, at least, not really." His fingers traced the edges gently, as if feeling the invisible weight it carried. "He said I was just the one meant to deliver it." The room was still, the usual buzz of the studio replaced by an almost sacred silence. The camera zoomed in, capturing the delicate folds of the envelope, the faded paper, the subtle light catching on its worn surface. It felt as though the envelope was alive, waiting patiently for the right moment and the right hands. Jimmy swallowed, his breath uneven. "You've never opened it?" His voice was a whisper, a mixture of awe and hesitation. "You've carried this all this time without knowing what's inside?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Some things," he said, "don't get lighter. We just learn how to carry them." His eyes met Jimmy's with steady certainty. "Elijah told me I would know when to open it, when I was sitting with someone who needed it more than I did." The words settled between them like a quiet invitation. The audience felt the weight of those words, the tension mounting, as if the envelope contained not just paper, but the unspoken hopes and fears of two souls meeting across time. Jimmy reached out, his hand hesitating over the envelope, as if afraid that breaking the seal might unleash something beyond words. His eyes searched Keanu's face for permission, for guidance. "And you think I'm the one it's meant for?" The question hung in the air, fragile and profound. Keanu's gaze dropped briefly to the crucifix resting against his chest, a steady presence amidst the uncertainty. He looked back up, voice soft but unwavering. "I think sometimes life doesn't give us answers," he said, "but it brings people together to sit with the questions, to share the silence." Jimmy exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and apprehension crossing his face. The envelope seemed to pulse with quiet urgency, a message waiting patiently for its moment. The studio lights dimmed slightly, as if responding to the shifting energy in the room. He looked down at the envelope again, tracing the delicate crease with his finger. "I've spent so long trying to keep the room alive, to make people laugh and forget the pain," he admitted. "But maybe it's time to stop running from the silence, to face it, even if it's hard." Keanu's smile was gentle, a quiet reassurance. "Sometimes, the silence is where we find the deepest truths." He reached across the table and placed his hand lightly over Jimmy's. "You don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes, presence is enough." The audience remained silent, moved by the intimacy of the moment. The usual applause and chatter of a late-night show had vanished, replaced by a shared understanding that transcended words. The envelope was more than a piece of paper. It was a symbol of trust, timing, and the courage to embrace the unknown. Jimmy nodded slowly, gathering his courage. "Shall we open it?" His voice was barely audible, but the question carried the weight of a decision that might change everything. Keanu's eyes held his, steady and calm. "If you're ready," he said. With deliberate care, Jimmy broke the seal. The soft tear of paper echoed in the hushed studio like the opening of a long-awaited door. He unfolded the letter slowly, the aged paper whispering secrets of a past that had waited patiently for this very moment. Keanu's voice softened as Jimmy began to read aloud. "To the one who hides behind light. You were just a kid when she got sick, and no one told you how to grieve when the person who raised you began to fade." The words hung in the air, a tender acknowledgement of a pain often carried in silence. Jimmy's voice faltered slightly, but he pressed on, the letter's message weaving through the room. "So you became the distraction. You learned how to make others laugh while your own chest was breaking in silence." The weight of the confession was palpable. You thought being funny would protect you. You thought applause would fill the hollow space, but every time they laughed, you wondered if she would have laughed too. The tears that had been restrained spilled freely now, tracing paths down Jimmy's cheeks. The barrier between host and guest dissolved entirely. The audience sat mesmerized, some wiping away tears, others simply breathing in the raw honesty of the moment. Keanu remained still, his gaze steady, allowing Jimmy the space to feel, to grieve openly. The crucifix shimmered softly, a beacon of quiet strength amidst the vulnerability. The letter lay on the table, a testament to the power of shared stories and silent truths finally given voice. The studio was transformed. A place of laughter had become a sanctuary of healing. The envelope, the notebook, the crucifix. They were not mere objects, but symbols of resilience, connection, and the enduring human spirit. Jimmy looked up from the letter, eyes glistening but clear. "Thank you," he whispered, voice breaking, yet filled with gratitude, "for bringing me here, for giving me this moment." Keanu's smile was faint but full of meaning. Sometimes the most important journey is the one we take together, in silence, in truth, in presence. The audience sat in awed silence, witnessing not just an interview, but a profound exchange of faith, grief, and hope. The envelope, now open, had become a bridge, connecting two men, two stories, and countless hearts beyond the studio walls. The studio fell into a hush as Keanu carefully lifted the fragile envelope from the table. The paper, worn and yellowed with age, seemed almost too delicate to touch. Yet, in Keanu's hands, it felt like a sacred relic, one carrying the weight of unspoken stories and long-held truths. The audience leaned forward, the air thick with anticipation. Jimmy's eyes were wide, fixed on the envelope. His voice, usually lively and warm, dropped to a hushed tone. "What is this?" he asked, his curiosity edged with reverence. The usual hum of a late-night show was gone, replaced by a silence that demanded respect. Keanu's fingers traced the edges gently, his expression contemplative. "Elijah gave this to me the night before he left," he said softly. "But he told me it wasn't really for me, that I was just meant to deliver it to someone else, someone who needed it more." The room seemed to hold its breath. The camera lingered on the envelope as it rested between them, its folds worn from time, waiting patiently for the right moment to be opened. The audience, both live and watching from afar, could feel the gravity of the moment settling over the studio like a quiet fog. Jimmy swallowed, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing down on him. "You've held on to this all these years without opening it?" His voice barely above a whisper, he seemed to understand the significance, the patience, the trust, the hope wrapped up in this single piece of paper. Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't meant to be shed. We just learn to carry them differently. Elijah told me that when the time came. When I was sitting with the person who needed it more, I'd know." An unspoken invitation hung in the air. Jimmy's hand hovered over the envelope, trembling as he reached out, caught between hesitation and the pull of something deeper than words. Jimmy's breath caught in his throat as he gently held the fragile envelope, the aged paper crackling softly under his fingers. His eyes searched Keanu's calm face for a sign, some silent permission, an unspoken agreement that what they were about to do mattered more than words or performance. The studio lights softened, as if dimming to honor the weight of the moment. The audience was utterly still, leaning forward as though they too felt the invisible threads connecting two souls across time and pain. "You really think this is meant for me?" Jimmy asked, his voice low, almost breaking with vulnerability. The question was more than curiosity. It was a desperate hope, an opening of a guarded heart. For years he had worn humor like armor, using laughter to mask his fears and grief, never imagining that a fragile letter might hold the key to healing. Keanu's gaze softened, the strength in his eyes tempered by deep compassion. "Life doesn't always hand us answers, Jimmy," he said slowly. "Sometimes it brings people together, not to solve the questions, but to share the silence, to simply be there with each other in the moments when words fail." His voice carried the gentle weight of understanding, inviting Jimmy to trust in the power of presence. Jimmy exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to release some of the tension wound tight inside him for so long. The envelope felt alive in his hands now, a sacred bridge built from shared losses and quiet resilience. The studio, which had been filled with laughter and applause just moments before, was now transformed into a sanctuary of empathy. Tracing the crease of the envelope with a trembling thumb, Jimmy confessed, "For so long I've been trying to keep the room alive, to distract everyone with jokes and smiles. But maybe it's time to stop running from the silence, from the weight I carry." Keanu offered a small, reassuring smile, a beacon in the dim light. "Silence isn't emptiness," he said softly. "It's presence. Sometimes the loudest voice we have is found in the quiet." His fingers instinctively touched the silver crucifix resting near his heart, its faint shimmer a symbol of steady faith and enduring hope. Jimmy nodded slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "So, shall we open it?" The simple question was heavy with promise, a pivotal moment suspended between hesitation and courage. Keanu met his eyes steadily. "If you're ready." With reverence, Jimmy broke the seal. The delicate tear of paper sounded like a whisper in the hushed studio, echoing through the hearts of all watching. He unfolded the letter slowly, the fragile pages fluttering softly, carrying secrets patiently held for years. Jimmy's voice trembled as he began reading aloud. Each word weighted with the care of someone unveiling a long-hidden truth. "To the one who hides behind light," he read, "you were just a child when she fell ill, and no one told you how to grieve when the person who raised you began to fade." The studio was cloaked in silence. The letter's words laid bare a story of quiet suffering. The boy who became a beacon of laughter and distraction, hiding his own breaking heart behind jokes and smiles. "You thought being funny would protect you," Jimmy continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You thought applause would fill the hollow space, but every time they laughed, you wondered if she would have laughed too." Tears streamed freely down faces, on stage, in the crowd, and through screens worldwide. The room was no longer a place of entertainment, but a sacred space of shared humanity, raw and vulnerable. Keanu sat steady beside Jimmy, a pillar of calm. The silver crucifix glinted softly under the stage lights, a symbol of enduring faith amidst fragility. His presence was an anchor in the storm of emotion. Jimmy lowered the letter gently, voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with gratitude and release, "for bringing me here, for giving me permission to be real." Keanu's faint smile carried profound understanding. Sometimes the greatest healing comes from being seen, being heard, and sharing the silence that has waited so long for a voice. The audience remained motionless, many wiping away tears, overwhelmed by the courage and grace unfolding before them. This was no longer just an interview, it was a testament to the healing power of vulnerability and connection. The studio lights softened further as the moment drew to a close. The crucifix shimmered once more, a beacon of hope, resilience, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. The studio air was thick with silence, an almost tangible stillness that settled over everyone present. No band played, no applause erupted, and the usual background hum of a live show faded into nothingness. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath alongside the audience, the crew, and the two men at the heart of this moment. The cameras, still rolling, captured every detail. The empty space where Jimmy had just stood, the soft glimmer of the silver crucifix on Keanu's chest, the gentle fold of the letter resting on the table between them. The usual scripted energy had drained away, replaced by a profound, shared recognition of something far more real than any show could contain. Backstage, crew members exchanged uncertain glances, their professional masks slipping as the weight of what had just happened pressed upon them. The director stared at the monitors, his hand running over his face, a quiet sigh escaping. The control room was eerily silent too, filled with technicians who understood that the night had shifted irreversibly. In the audience, the initial shock lingered. People sat frozen in their seats, many with hands clasped tightly, others wiping tears from their cheeks. No one had moved to applaud or cheer. There was simply no space for anything but silence and reflection. The usually raucous energy of a late-night show had been replaced by something sacred and still. Jimmy's absence was felt profoundly. His sudden departure had shattered the usual rhythm, leaving a void where his laughter and charm once filled the room. But more than that, it was the vulnerability he had exposed, the rawness beneath the surface, that gripped everyone's hearts. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, rich with meaning and respect. Keanu remained seated, his posture composed yet gentle. His eyes did not seek the cameras or the crowd, but seemed to look inward, perhaps reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The crucifix gleamed softly in the subdued lights, a quiet symbol of faith, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. Backstage, the mood was palpably tense. The usual hustle of production slowed to a cautious stillness. Producers exchanged hurried whispers, their faces marked by concern as they tried to chart a path forward amidst uncertainty. Calls were made, messages sent, all searching for answers on how to proceed after the unexpected pause. The control room, typically alive with quick chatter and energetic commands, had quieted significantly. Technicians exchanged nervous glances as the moment stretched, aware that they were witnessing something that transcended normal programming. They waited, unsure if the cameras would cut away or continue capturing this raw and unfiltered human connection unfolding live. On the studio floor, stagehands paused, some standing motionless near their equipment. Even the janitors, usually invisible in the background, seemed to hold their breath, sensing the gravity of the moment. The absence of music and laughter echoed like a silent signal, a collective recognition that this was no ordinary show. Within the audience, rows of people remained seated, many clasping hands tightly, others dabbing at their eyes with tissues. The usual excitement of a live taping had melted into profound stillness. There was no applause, no cheering, only a shared experience of vulnerability and empathy that transcended the physical distance between stage and seats. Each face in the crowd reflected a story of their own: grief, hope, love, and the universal human struggle to find meaning in loss. The space between the host and guest had transformed into a sacred ground, an invisible thread connecting everyone present through the unspoken power of truth and presence. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the door at the side of the stage quietly opened. Jimmy Fallon re-entered, his usual lively demeanor replaced by a quiet solemnity. His steps were measured, his shoulders carrying the invisible weight of the conversation he had just lived through. The redness around his eyes was unmistakable, evidence of tears recently shed, or perhaps held back. Yet despite this, his movements were steady and deliberate, a testament to resilience and the courage to face deep emotional truths head-on. He approached his chair with a softness previously unseen, the confident swagger replaced by a gentle humility. Sitting down across from Keanu, he offered no forced smile or quick quip. Instead, he acknowledged the moment's gravity through silence, allowing the weight of the shared experience to settle fully. The cameras lingered on this tableau, capturing the nuance of two men united not only by friendship, but by the shared journey of grief and healing. The audience watched, sensing that this was more than television. It was a moment of profound human connection. As Jimmy lowered himself into the chair, the atmosphere shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. The tension in the air, once heavy and fraught, softened into something warmer, more introspective. The energy in the room moved from discomfort to a gentle, collective understanding. Keanu met Jimmy's eyes, their silent exchange filled with empathy, mutual respect, and the recognition of shared pain. There was no need for words. Their presence alone spoke volumes about the depth of what they had just experienced together. Both men sat quietly, the crucifix resting near Keanu's heart, catching the studio lights with a soft, steady gleam, a silent emblem of faith and hope amidst vulnerability. The letter lay between them, a physical reminder of the stories and emotions carried through time and now shared openly. The audience remained captivated, many with tears glistening, some whispering quiet prayers or reflections. This was no longer a performance or a scripted interaction, but a rare and sacred moment, where the boundaries between host, guest, and viewer dissolved into a collective experience of humanity. The cameras continued to roll, capturing not the spectacle but the sincere and raw emotions of two people navigating the complexities of loss and faith in real time. The usual late-night show hallmarks, laughter, applause, and scripted banter, were absent, replaced by a reverent silence that filled the studio with meaning. As the segment drew to a close, there was a shared sense among everyone present that something profound had shifted, not just in that room, but in the hearts of all who bore witness. The silence was thick with unspoken promises, healing, and the quiet power of empathy. Slowly, the studio lights dimmed further, as if to honor the sacred space they had created. The crucifix shimmered once more in the gentle glow, a beacon of resilience, faith, and the enduring strength found in connection. In those final moments, no one rushed to break the silence. The show had paused in time, holding space for a truth far greater than words, a moment that would resonate long after the cameras stopped rolling. The studio remained enveloped in silence after the weighty words of the letter had been read aloud. The stillness stretched, almost reverent, as the audience sat absorbed in the depth of the moment. Jimmy's eyes lingered on the fragile pages before him, then slowly lifted to meet Keanu's steady gaze. His voice, when it finally emerged, was softer than usual, heavy with an honesty rarely exposed on stage. "How did Elijah know so much about my pain?" Jimmy asked, his tone more a confession than a question. It was the kind of query that peeled back years of guarded walls, the sort of vulnerable admission that revealed the human beneath the public persona. Keanu nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the profound nature of the question. "Elijah had a way of looking beyond what people showed on the surface," he answered softly. "He saw through the masks we wear, the smiles we put on to hide the heaviness within. He noticed the invisible burdens, the struggles people carry quietly without saying a word." Jimmy shifted in his seat, a flicker of emotion crossing his features. "I've never really shared my grief publicly," he said quietly. "Not the way you do now. It's something I always kept inside, a secret burden. I thought if I kept it hidden, it would make me stronger. But maybe it only made me lonelier." Keanu's expression was gentle, his voice full of understanding. "Some pain doesn't need to be spoken. It just needs someone willing to listen, someone who hears beyond the noise of words." He gestured toward the letter lying on the table. Elijah understood that deeply. The studio felt suspended in that tender stillness. There was a connection forged in that exchange, a sacred space where performance faded and authentic human presence took its place. For a moment, it was not a television show, but a shared journey of healing and truth. Jimmy's eyes glistened, reflecting the quiet storm of emotions swirling within him. His fingers lingered on the edges of the fragile letter, as if holding on to something more than just paper, something heavy with memories, with unspoken grief. "It's strange," he began softly, "how laughter can sometimes be a mask. I've spent years, decades really, being the one who brings joy to others. Making people laugh felt like armor, a way to protect myself from the sorrow I couldn't face." He paused, swallowing hard, his voice catching on the weight of the confession. "But the truth is, that laughter hid a loneliness I never let anyone see. I thought if I kept it all inside, if I never let anyone know the pain, maybe it wouldn't hurt as much. but it just made me carry the burden alone. Keanu's eyes softened, full of quiet understanding and compassion. That's a burden many carry, Jimmy. The need to be the light in the darkness, even when their own hearts feel heavy. Elijah taught me something important about that. He showed me that true courage isn't in hiding pain, but in sitting with it. Being present with the darkness instead of running from it. The crucifix resting near Keanu's heart caught the studio light, shimmering gently like a beacon of hope in a dim room. Jimmy's fingers traced the surface of the letter, grounding himself in the tangible reminder of shared humanity and vulnerability. There's a different kind of courage in silence, Keanu continued, his voice steady but gentle. Not the silence that isolates or distances, but the silence that listens deeply. The silence that holds space for pain without judgment, that allows us to be seen fully, even when we can't find the words to say. Jimmy exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of tension held tight in his chest. I think I've spent so long trying to protect myself behind smiles and jokes that I forgot how brave it takes to be vulnerable. Maybe it's time to stop pretending that I'm okay. The audience was rapt, drawn into this raw moment of honesty. This was no longer a scripted segment for entertainment. It was a shared experience of healing, a quiet invitation for everyone watching to face their own hidden wounds with courage. Keanu's gentle smile carried the weight of years of understanding and compassion. It was the kind of smile that didn't rush to fix or dismiss pain, but simply honored its presence. Pain, he said softly, has a language all its own. It doesn't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it is felt in the quietest spaces between words, in the silences that hang heavier than any conversation. He paused, letting those words settle like a soft echo in the room. Elijah was one of those rare people who could hear that language. He understood that the loudest cries often come wrapped in silence. The grief that goes unseen, and the sorrow that no one dares to voice. Jimmy looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting Keanu's with a newfound openness, as if a wall had quietly crumbled between them. "Do you think that's why Elijah gave you this notebook?" he asked, his voice low and earnest. "To teach you that language? To remind you, and maybe me, that we're never truly alone in carrying what we bear?" Keanu nodded, his eyes reflecting the depth of the shared truth. Exactly. The notebook is more than just pages and ink. It's a reminder that beneath the surface, everyone carries stories. Stories of loss, of faith, of hope that flickers in the darkest moments. And that sometimes the greatest gift we can give one another is the gift of listening. Really listening, beyond words. The two men sat in quiet communion, connected by more than friendship. They were linked by vulnerability and the tender honesty of being truly seen. The crucifix glinted again in the soft glow of the studio lights, a symbol not only of faith, but of endurance, presence, and the power of empathy. The audience, too, was held in that stillness, many dabbing their eyes, some swallowing hard against rising emotion. This was no longer a scripted exchange for entertainment. It had transformed into a sacred space where hearts could open and wounds could begin to heal. As the lights softened, it felt as though the entire room inhaled together, a collective breath drawn in reverence for the moment. The silence was full, heavy with meaning, but also with hope. The hope that comes when pain is met with understanding instead of avoidance. In that shared quiet, the barriers of celebrity and stage melted away. What remained was raw humanity. Two men, two souls, navigating the fragile journey through grief and faith. The audience sat in hushed awe, bearing witness to a moment that transcended the usual rhythms of television. Keanu reached out lightly, his hand resting briefly over the notebook, as if sealing a sacred promise. Jimmy's gaze softened, the lines of tension easing from his face. They were no longer just host and guest, but companions on a path that few get to walk so openly. The crucifix shimmered once more, steady, unwavering, reminding everyone present that even in the darkest silence, light endures. It was a beacon of faith, not bound to any doctrine, but rooted deeply in the human heart. As the cameras held their frame, the room remained suspended between what was said and what remained unspoken, in the space where true healing begins. The moment lingered, imprinting itself quietly on all who experienced it. A silent testament to the strength found in vulnerability and the grace of being truly heard. The studio felt different now, transformed by the honesty that had unfolded between Jimmy and Keanu. What began as a scripted, late-night segment had quietly become a sanctuary, a place where grief, faith, and healing could be shared openly. Jimmy exhaled, the breath heavy yet freeing, a release after holding back for so long. "It's strange," he began, voice low and thoughtful. "How much weight I've been carrying, without even realizing it. Saying it out loud, finally admitting it, feels like the first breath after being underwater for too long." His usual bravado had given way to something raw, something real. The crowd sat hushed, leaning in as if their own hearts were part of this fragile moment. The laughter and applause from earlier felt distant, replaced by a reverent silence. Keanu's eyes were steady, filled with the calm empathy of someone who had walked through similar shadows. "Healing doesn't come from pretending everything is fine," he said gently. "It begins when someone listens, not to fix or judge, but to simply be present with the silence and the pain." The silver crucifix around Keanu's neck caught the soft studio light, glowing quietly, a symbol of resilience and quiet faith in the face of suffering. "Elijah taught me that faith isn't about having all the answers," Keanu continued. "It's about holding space, holding the silence without fear." Jimmy's gaze softened as he absorbed the weight of those words. "I've always tried to be the one to bring laughter, to keep things light, to protect everyone else. But maybe I was protecting myself from facing my own pain." Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes the bravest act is to stop hiding behind the laughter and let the silence speak." The cameras kept rolling, but the usual tempo of the show slowed. There was space now for something deeper, a healing energy that had quietly taken root between the two men and the audience. Jimmy shifted in his chair, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing as he allowed himself to fully inhabit the space between them. "For so many years," he began, voice low and reflective, "I thought I had to be the one to carry the light for everyone else, to keep the room laughing, to make sure no one saw the cracks. It was my way of protecting not just them, but myself." His eyes lowered for a moment, the usual sparkle dimmed by a weight long carried. But beneath all the smiles and the jokes, there was a loneliness that grew, a quiet, relentless ache I never let anyone see. The kind of loneliness that stretches into every quiet moment and makes the world feel colder. Keanu's gaze softened with deep empathy, the reflection of shared understanding shining clear. "That kind of loneliness is a burden too many carry alone," he said quietly. "Elijah taught me that true strength isn't in running from our pain, but in sitting with it, in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to face the discomfort head-on." The silver crucifix resting near Keanu's heart caught the soft glow of the studio lights, shimmering like a beacon of hope amidst shadows. There is a special kind of courage in silence, not the silence that isolates or hides, but the silence that listens deeply, holds space without judgment, and allows us to be seen as we really are. Jimmy took a slow, steadying breath, a long exhale that seemed to release years of unspoken sorrow. "For so long I pretended to be someone I wasn't. I thought I had to hide who I really was beneath the laughter and the spotlight. But tonight, I feel like I'm starting to uncover the real me." The audience sat captivated, many with tears shimmering on their lashes, as they witnessed a profound shift. The show, once just entertainment, had become a sanctuary of shared healing and connection. Keanu's smile was gentle and steady, radiating a quiet reassurance that transcended words. His voice softened as he spoke, carrying the weight of experience and compassion. "Pain has its own language," he said, "one that isn't always spoken aloud. Often it is carried silently, in the spaces between words, in the quiet moments that others might miss." He paused, letting the gravity of those words settle over the room like a soft veil. Elijah was one of the few who could hear that silent language. He understood that sometimes the loudest cries come not from a shout, but from the silence that surrounds it. The grief so profound that it cannot be voiced. Jimmy met Keanu's gaze, vulnerability blooming in the shared space between them. "Is that why Elijah gave you this notebook?" Jimmy asked, his voice gentle yet curious. "To teach you to listen for that language? To remind you, and maybe me, that beneath every smile, beneath every laugh, there's a story we don't always tell?" Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes shining with shared understanding. "Yes. This notebook isn't just ink on paper. It's a testament to the stories that lie beneath the surface. Stories of loss, of hope, of faith. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can offer each other is simply the willingness to listen." The two men sat in profound stillness, connected through their shared vulnerability and presence. The crucifix around Keanu's neck caught the studio light once more, glimmering softly. A symbol not only of faith, but of enduring grace and the healing power of empathy. The audience remained hushed, many wiping tears from their eyes, moved deeply by the authenticity of the moment. The studio light softened, as if honoring the sacredness of this fragile exchange. The silence that filled the studio was anything but empty. It was a charged, sacred pause, inviting reflection, inviting healing. This was no longer just a television show. It was a space where souls touched and wounds began to mend. It became clear that this moment would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling, becoming a lasting testament to the courage it takes to be truly seen, truly heard, and truly understood. The power of this simple exchange, the sharing of silence, the presence of empathy, was undeniable. It held the audience captive, drawing them into a shared experience of human fragility and strength. Jimmy's expression softened, a quiet gratitude shining through his eyes. "Thank you, Keanu," he said softly, voice thick with emotion, "for reminding us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to let someone else in, to stop hiding and simply be." Keanu's smile deepened, peaceful and knowing. "Thank you, Jimmy, for being willing to listen, to share your story. That openness, that courage, is the beginning of healing." The audience rose slowly, their applause gentle but heartfelt, a tribute not just to a performance, but to a moment of profound humanity. The cameras faded to black, capturing more than a show. It captured a turning point, a healing beginning that would echo far beyond the studio walls. The days after the remarkable interview with Keanu Reeves were unlike any Jimmy Fallon had ever experienced in his long career. The usual whirlwind of rehearsals, jokes, and showtime energy felt distant, almost foreign. That night, something had shifted within him. The vulnerability and raw honesty Keanu had brought to the stage had cracked open a part of Jimmy's heart he didn't even realize was closed. He kept thinking about the moments when laughter paused, when silence filled the studio instead of applause. Those silences were heavy with meaning. They held grief, hope, and an unspoken connection. It was as if the studio, usually filled with gleaming lights and roaring crowds, had transformed into a sacred space, a place where real pain and healing could breathe. Jimmy realized his audience was craving more than just the usual humor and banter. Behind every smile, every joke, there was a story aching to be told. The applause was a mask, but people wanted authenticity. They wanted to be seen, heard, and understood. That realization planted a seed in Jimmy's mind. What if his show could be more than a nightly comedy routine? What if it could become a space where people could share their deepest struggles and moments of resilience without fear or shame? What if there was room for silence alongside laughter? Out of that seed grew an idea, a new segment called Listen Before You Laugh, a place where stories of pain and healing could be shared openly, without punchlines or forced humor. A segment where silence was not uncomfortable, but honored, where listening itself was an act of courage. Jimmy shared this vision with his producers in a meeting charged with energy and uncertainty. Some were skeptical, worried it might alienate the audience or disrupt the show's formula. But many were inspired, sensing the power of something different, something deeper. Jimmy's conviction was unshakable. The world was ready for this. His show could lead the way. The challenge was clear: to create a segment that balanced honesty with hope, vulnerability with strength. It wouldn't be easy, but Jimmy was determined. Listen Before You Laugh would be more than a new bit. It would be a mission to bring healing to a culture hungry for truth. When Listen Before You Laugh finally aired, the atmosphere in the studio was different, expectant, reverent, charged with quiet anticipation. Jimmy introduced the segment with a gentle, sincere tone that immediately set it apart from the usual fast-paced comedy. "Tonight we're going to do something a little different," he told the audience. "We're going to listen. Not just hear the words, but really listen. Because sometimes, before the laughter, there's a story that needs to be shared." The first guests were ordinary people, carrying extraordinary burdens. A mother who had lost her child spoke softly about her journey through grief and the slow, uneven path toward healing. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with tears she held back. The audience leaned in, silent, bearing witness to her truth. Next, a military veteran recounted nights filled with memories too heavy to share casually. His laughter was sparse and quiet, masking scars that time had not healed. He spoke about the weight of surviving battles long after the war ended, about the loneliness of carrying invisible wounds. The studio felt the gravity of his story, a heavy pause settling over the room. Then came a man who hadn't shed a tear since his father's passing decades ago. He described the loneliness of burying pain deep inside, pretending everything was fine. His admission was raw and honest, breaking through the usual walls people build to protect themselves. The audience sat spellbound, some with eyes glistening, others wiping away tears. Jimmy listened attentively, no jokes, no distractions, just genuine empathy and presence. The studio lights softened, the usual vibrant energy giving way to a sacred stillness. It was a moment of shared humanity, a collective breath held and released together. Viewers at home were moved as well. Social media quickly filled with messages of gratitude, reflections, and shared stories. Many wrote that for the first time, they felt seen and understood on a late-night stage. "Thank you for making space for the quiet ones," one tweet read. Another said, "This changed how I see grief and laughter." The segment grew rapidly beyond its initial airing. It became a beacon, an invitation to break the silence surrounding pain, mental health, and resilience. Late-night television, known for its jokes and distractions, had created a new space, one where truth and healing could live. This change wasn't without risk. Critics questioned if humor and late night could mix with such deep honesty. Some worried about alienating audiences used to light entertainment. But the overwhelming response proved there was hunger for this kind of authenticity. People craved real conversations that acknowledged the complexity of life. Listen Before You Laugh wasn't just a segment, it was a movement. It challenged conventions, inviting viewers to embrace vulnerability and recognize the strength it takes to be honest about one's struggles. It reminded everyone that behind every smile is a story worth hearing. Jimmy felt the weight and privilege of this responsibility. This wasn't about ratings or viral clips. It was about human connection, about giving voice to stories that too often go unheard. The segment became a sanctuary where pain could be acknowledged, where hope could flicker and grow. As Listen Before You Laugh continued, its impact rippled far beyond the studio walls. What began as a single segment blossomed into a cultural movement, challenging the very nature of late-night television and public conversation. People across the country began to embrace the idea that vulnerability was not weakness but strength, that sharing pain could be an act of courage and connection. Jimmy Fallon found himself personally transformed by the experience. The segment had opened a door within him that he hadn't realized was closed. He sought out stories from all walks of life, individuals bearing heavy burdens, survivors of loss, people who had struggled in silence and were finally ready to speak. Each episode deepened the show's tone, weaving a rich tapestry of resilience and hope that resonated with millions. The change was palpable in the studio. The lights no longer just illuminated a stage, they illuminated hearts. Viewers no longer came merely to be entertained. They came to be seen, to be heard, to be part of a healing conversation. The energy shifted from fleeting laughter to lasting connection. Other late-night hosts began to follow suit, opening spaces for honest conversation on their platforms. Discussions around mental health, grief, and resilience moved from whispers to mainstream discourse. The phrase, "Listen before you laugh," became a quiet anthem, a reminder that behind every joke lies a human story, and behind every smile, a struggle worth acknowledging. For Jimmy, the symbols of that night, the silver crucifix Keanu wore and the worn leather notebook filled with reflections, became talismans of this new chapter. They represented faith, presence, empathy, and the power of human connection. Together, Jimmy and Keanu had opened a door for millions to find healing and truth. This was only the beginning. The journey they started on that stage continued to unfold, inspiring people everywhere to listen more deeply and laugh more genuinely. It was a call to walk alongside each other, embracing both silence and healing. Jimmy knew that his show had forever changed, not just for him, but for everyone willing to be vulnerable. The lights shone not just on performers, but on real stories that mattered. And in that light, a new kind of laughter could be born, one that came from genuine joy, born of connection and understanding. About a month after the powerful and transformative Listen Before You Laugh segment debuted, the atmosphere surrounding Jimmy Fallon's late-night show had quietly but profoundly changed. While the familiar laughter and energy still filled the studio, there was now an undercurrent of something deeper, a growing awareness and respect for moments of genuine vulnerability and raw human connection. Audiences were no longer tuning in solely for jokes or celebrity banter. They were seeking something more meaningful, spaces where pain and healing could be spoken of openly, without masks or pretense. One ordinary morning, a simple, unmarked package arrived at the NBC studio, addressed to Jimmy Fallon. Wrapped meticulously in soft linen cloth and tied with a rough twine bow, the package carried an air of solemnity and mystery. The delivery was made quietly, with the courier sensing that the contents held significance beyond ordinary parcels. The studio staff received it with care, their curiosity tempered by the reverence the moment demanded. Jimmy personally took the package to a quiet room backstage. With deliberate care, he untied the twine and peeled back the linen, revealing a small, exquisite silver crucifix resting upon a velvet cushion. Beside it lay a delicate card, handwritten in graceful script. The message was simple, yet profoundly moving. "You don't have to carry this alone." This crucifix was unmistakable. the very same design that had hung around Keanu Reeves' neck during that unforgettable interview months earlier, the one that had been entrusted to Keanu by Elijah, the janitor whose quiet wisdom had changed him forever. More than just a piece of metal, this crucifix was a symbol, a beacon of faith, resilience, and the invisible burdens that so many carry in silence. As Jimmy held the crucifix in his hands, a flood of emotions swept through him. Gratitude for the journey he and Keanu had shared, humility for the courage it took to be vulnerable on such a public stage, and a deep, comforting sense of connection to something larger than himself. This was no ordinary gift. It was a sacred reminder that the path through pain and healing is not meant to be walked alone. It was a tangible expression of the invisible threads that link human hearts in moments of quiet strength. Jimmy felt an overwhelming desire to honor that connection, to carry the crucifix not as a mere accessory, but as a symbol of the movement that had been sparked. This gift was a call to continue the work begun on that stage, to deepen the conversation, and to invite others into the space where silence and healing coexist. The unassuming package that arrived at NBC Studio was unlike any other Jimmy Fallon had ever received. Wrapped in soft linen and tied with simple twine, it carried the weight of unspoken stories. The moment Jimmy peeled back the linen to reveal the silver crucifix resting delicately on a velvet cushion, a wave of quiet emotion washed over him. Beside it, a small handwritten card bore the words, "You don't have to carry this alone." This crucifix was not just jewelry, it was a profound symbol, a silent testament to pain, resilience, and the unseen battles so many face daily. It was the very same cross Keanu Reeves had worn during their unforgettable interview, a symbol entrusted to him by Elijah, the janitor whose quiet wisdom had forever changed Keanu's outlook on faith, silence, and healing. Jimmy felt a surge of gratitude and humility as he held the delicate piece. It was a reminder of the journey that had unfolded on that stage, an invitation to continue fostering spaces where vulnerability was honored rather than hidden. It symbolized connection, the kind that transcends words and reaches deep into the shared human experience. Determined to carry this message forward, Jimmy quietly incorporated the crucifix into the closing moments of his new segment, Listen Before You Laugh. Wearing it subtly over his heart, just visible beneath his shirt, he created a powerful symbol of empathy and solidarity. The cross became a beacon, not of doctrine or dogma, but of presence, courage, and the strength found in simply being there for one another. As the studio lights dimmed each night, the energy shifted. The usual buzz of humor and applause softened into a gentle stillness. Jimmy's face, once animated with jokes, took on a contemplative calm. Looking directly into the camera, his voice lowered with steady conviction. Tonight, the audience doesn't need to laugh. They need to listen. Those words settled deep, inviting viewers everywhere to pause and reflect. The typical upbeat outro music faded into a tender silence, a rare moment that allowed the message to resonate with real power. Across countless homes and devices, people stopped scrolling, caught by the sincerity of the moment. Social media quickly filled with heartfelt responses, stories of pain, loss, hope, and healing. Many shared how the segment gave them courage to confront their own hidden struggles and the relief of knowing they were not alone. The crucifix had transcended its religious symbolism, becoming a universal emblem of shared humanity and resilience. Jimmy's choice to wear it quietly but intentionally spoke volumes. It was a reminder that healing is not about grand displays, but about the quiet strength found in presence and vulnerability. The segment transformed late-night television, evolving from mere entertainment into a platform for authentic human connection. The message was clear. No one has to carry their burdens in silence. Strength lies in being seen, in being heard, and in creating space for healing. For Jimmy, the crucifix was not just an accessory. It was a call to embody empathy and to champion the power of listening. The silver crucifix, resting quietly now in Jimmy Fallon's hands, was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It had become a symbol of transformation, hope, and the human capacity to heal. The impact of that simple emblem radiated far beyond the NBC studio, touching hearts and minds across the country and around the world. What began as a private gift had blossomed into a cultural beacon, illuminating a path toward empathy and authentic connection in a world starved for both. Social media channels were soon filled with images of the crucifix, shared by viewers moved by the message of vulnerability and strength. The simple phrase Jimmy spoke at the end of each "Listen Before You Laugh" segment, "Tonight, the audience doesn't need to laugh, they need to listen," became a mantra repeated in living rooms, classrooms, and quiet corners where people wrestled with their own pain. The crucifix itself transcended its religious origins. For many, it symbolized a shared human experience, the silent struggles, the quiet burdens carried unseen, and the courage it takes to be present with those struggles. Jimmy's humble choice to wear the crucifix, never overtly preaching but always quietly honoring its significance, spoke volumes about his evolving role as more than a late-night host. He had become a gentle guide into a new kind of conversation, one that valued presence over performance, authenticity over spectacle. His show no longer relied solely on scripted jokes or celebrity chatter. Instead, it became a place where real stories of loss, healing, and hope could be told and heard without judgment. This cultural shift inspired other programs, broadcasters, and communities to create spaces where people could share their truths openly. The stigma surrounding grief, mental health, and faith began to erode, replaced by a growing recognition that these are not weaknesses, but vital parts of the human condition. The crucifix and the quiet dignity it represented became a rallying point for those seeking connection amid isolation. Keanu Reeves, whose own journey with faith and healing had been illuminated through that notebook given to him by Elijah, remained a powerful figurehead for this movement. Elijah's leather-bound notebook, filled with reflections, prayers, and silent wisdom, was a reminder that faith and healing are often found not in grand declarations, but in the stillness between words, in listening and simply being there. The transformation of the show was profound. What was once a stage for rehearsed performances and lighthearted banter had become a sanctuary of truth and compassion. The studio lights now highlighted not only entertainers but also the raw, authentic stories that unfold in the quiet spaces between laughter. The audience was no longer passive spectators, but active participants in a collective journey toward healing. As each episode drew to a close, the fading screen marked not merely the end of a broadcast, but the beginning of something larger, a cultural awakening. Born from a simple gift, a silver crucifix, a handwritten card, and the courage to listen deeply, this movement stood as a testament to the enduring power of empathy and shared humanity. This was a reminder to millions watching that they were not alone in their struggles, that no one had to carry their burdens in silence. And perhaps most importantly, it showed that healing often begins with one person choosing to truly listen. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact continued to grow, quietly yet powerfully. Viewers began forming support groups inspired by the message. Schools and workplaces opened conversations about emotional health, inspired by the show's example. The crucifix, once a private emblem of faith, had become a symbol of universal resilience and hope. Jimmy's presence on screen, marked by the subtle glint of the crucifix against his chest, was a constant reminder that even in the most public of spaces, vulnerability and strength can coexist. The world watched as laughter and tears found balance, and as a new era of honesty and healing quietly unfolded under the bright lights. The story that began with a gift, the crucifix and its message, had grown into a movement that touched lives in ways no one could have predicted. It proved that sometimes the loudest revolutions start in silence, that sometimes the deepest healing comes from being truly seen and heard. And so, as the screen fades once more, leaving millions in reflective silence, the message remains clear and unshaken. You don't have to carry your burdens alone. There is strength in presence, power in empathy, and hope in simply listening.